Everyone. Just want to start an apology, a double apology. First of all, my shiur on Shiur last Sunday was pretty abysmal. I partly excused myself because it was a fast day, but the truth is, as I wrote in my note, I've been trying to avoid Binyan and Shiur BeKelim, quite frankly, because I'm scared of it. But one has to be brave in life, gentlemen. So there's no choice but to work our way through it. And I tried to spend a lot of last week and last night trying to get through the sugya. I apologize also for the length of the source sheets. They are a reflection of not enough time to prepare. Like I think Churchill said, it takes I don't know, someone said, why did you speak at such length? And he said, because I didn't have time to prepare anything shorter. It takes more time to prepare something short than something long. And I apologize for that. What I would like to do though is pretty much, I suspect, when do we end Zaman, Adam? Next Sunday, wow. Okay, so could we do Tuesday? Maybe we'll see. We'll see where we're up to in the show. We may need to do Tuesday also. Okay, we'll see. But basically, the last few shiurim, we're just going to look at the sugya of Binyan and Shiur BeKelim. There's no way to duck it, and I've spent a few years procrastinating and trying to avoid the sugya, but it's time to plunge into it. We'll do our best. I'm also going to give everyone a lot of work for the holidays because all we are going to do in the shiur is look at the classic sources, basically the Gemara, the Rishonim, and the Mishnah down to Mishnah Berurah level. There is fascinating halachic discussion about how to translate this all into practice, particularly over the most common things that we do on Shabbos, which is opening fruit juice cartons, opening bottle lids, opening cans of Coke, opening cans of tuna. You know, a Shabbos presents an array of potential binyan and Shiur and BeKelim. This is so halacha l'maisa, this topic. I can't. It's so halacha l'maisa. It affects everything we do, and probably you're aware that there's a range of different views out there. So maybe you know that your Rav says that you can open a metal cap but not a plastic cap, and you know that when you go to a Sheva Brachos with other people there, you're the Shabbos guy and you open a bottle for people because no one else does or other people do, and so on. This is like a whole, it's a sort of whole halachic area. And I will share with you like a range of sources from Shemir Shabbos Gilchason and Shemir Zalman Auerbach and Rabbi Yosef and the Chazon Ish around all these topics, and that will be Ben Osmanim homework for those who wish to do it. But it's impossible to do without this introduction, which is what we'll be learning. So we'll be learning Gemara, and one of the reasons I decided to do this now is because our Gemara is one of the primary sources. There is no good place to do Binyan and Shiur and BeKelim because it's scattered in about 5 different sugyas in Shas, and at some point or other you have to decide to do it. And we've now seen 2 sugyas. We've seen the sugya in our sugya in. I haven't left myself a handout sheet. Sorry, do I have them? Oh no, I gave myself a handout sheet. No, I've got. It's fine. No, I've got involved. Sorry, I thought I printed it for myself. So basically, there is the primary sugyas to have a look at is the Gemara in Beitzah Kaf which I printed. Our Gemara, and then the next Gemara I put on, which isn't really a primary source, but it's convenient because we did it, is the Gemara in Ein Daled on the base. So we've seen 2 of the major sources, so it makes sense to take the leap and try and address Binyan and Shiur and BeKelim. Okay, the basic. Yes, yes, but we didn't do. I'm just saying we did. We've done 2 of the main sources, which is our Gemara in Kuf Beis on the base and the Gemara in Ein Daled, and there's at least 3 more other sources, significantly the Gemara in Beitzah, and then other ones, which, the reason I knew all these sources was I just worked my way through the Shonim, and they all cross-reference all the sugyas. The basic issue is as follows, that we have a Gemara in Beitzah, and in a couple of other places, that when you work, which raises the possibility of Yesh Binyan VeStira BeKelim, or Ein Binyan VeStira BeKelim, that there is or there isn't the melachot of Boneh and Sosa with Kelim. And if you work through the Gemara and Beitzah, the simplest understanding when you crunch the data is that Beis Hillel's view is Ein Binyan VeStira BeKelim, which should be the halacha. So basically, we have a Gemara which seems to suggest a rule, Ein Binyan VeStira BeKelim. And then you have an array of other Gemaras which do seem to consider Boneh and Sosa with respect to Kelim. And the question is how it fits. That's the summary of the sugya, really, which is a primary source, which is why I said the Gemara in Beitzah comes first, which seems to establish a principle that Ein Binyan VeStira BeKelim, that the melachot of Boneh and Sosa is with other things, not Kelim, with buildings or tents, but not Kelim, and then a series of Gemaras which seem to imply otherwise. And basically a project that the Rishonim embarked on of trying to understand what the rules of Ein Binyan VeStira BeKelim is. And the basic answer is that in many cases, ein binyan and stira BeKelim, but don't read it as an absolute ironclad rule. There are cases where you do have binyan and stira BeKelim in a particular form, and that's really all we're going to be learning, which is what are the principles of binyan and stira BeKelim, when does it apply and when doesn't it apply. We'll try and understand the concepts, the logic behind it, why should these be exceptions according to the Gemara as understood by the Rishonim, and finally we'll see how this translates into Shulchan Aruch. That's what our mission is for the next probably couple of shiurim at least. And then the application of all of this was the project of the 1900s, the 1950s and on, when all these disposable utensils began coming out, and suddenly what was a relatively rare area of halacha became super common because suddenly everyone was opening cans of tuna and bottle tops and the like, and that became like a later generation halachic project, which will be the Bein Hazmanim homework. Okay, so with that introduction given, I'm going to try really and just highlight the key things that I wanted to bring out from some of the sources. And in the WhatsApp note, I wrote sort of instructions about what to focus on just to make this manageable. I will, if I have time before Tuesday, try and give an abbreviated version of the source sheet that will be slightly more focused, but I just simply ran out of time and didn't manage to shorten things. So there's a Gemara in BeTzah Daf Kaf Aleph, in which basically I cut and paste part of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says Shloshah Dvarim Rabban Gamliel Machmir Ketuv Beis Shammai. There were three areas where Rabban Gamliel was machmir like Beis Shammai, and one of them is the Ein Zoik V'Nes HaMenorah B'Yom Tov. You're not allowed to set up the menorah on Yom Tov, and the Gemara there discusses what's the machlok, because Micah Ovid, what have you done? What did you do? And the Gemara answers Omar Rav Chinana Ba Bisna. This is the second paragraph in the. Oh yeah, I printed the wrong part. I printed the first 3 lines of the Gemara wrongly, straight after the Gemara for 3 lines. The next bit, in Zokfinis and Menorah, I apologize for that. Micah Ovid, line through this. Omar Rab Chinana, this is what happens in the source sheet. Omar Rab Chinana Ba Misna, Hacha B'mai Oskinon. This is the case. B'menorah Shel Chulius Oskinon. In a menorah made of parts, it looks like Boneh. To be Shama Yisava Yesh Binyan BeKelim, or be Sil Sovri Ein Binyan BeKelim, VeStira BeKelim.
Unless I've got the wrong part of your head.
Here, have a look in source 1. You've got the Mishnah of Shloshah Dvarim. Then look in the Ein Zokvin. Es HaMenorah. So you've got the Mishnah in the first line, then you've got 3 lines of Gemara, which I shouldn't have printed there. Get rid of them. Then you've got the Ein Zokvin Es HaMenorah, the heading the Ein Zokvin Es HaMenorah. No, Micah Ovid, what have you done? Here we're talking about a menorah of Chulius. You got it? Okay, sorry, fine, apologies, yeah. Fine, okay. So, and then the Gemara concludes that Beis Hillel holds Ein Binyan VeStira BeKelim. Okay, so basically the Gemara says we're talking about Ein Zokvin Es HaMenorah. What on earth does it mean? You can't stand up a menorah. What halacha is this? Is this hilchas mukta? Is this hilchas mavir? Is it something to do with oil supplies on Yom Tov? Like what are we talking about? So Gemara says we're talking about an IKEA flat pack menorah that arrives in parts, and you click it together and you set up a menorah. And the issue is whether yesh or ein binyan VeStira BeKelim. That's the halachic debate. And Rabbi Gamliel, in this case, for whatever reason, was machmir like Beis Shammai, but Beis Hillel held ein binyan VeStira BeKelim, and therefore, based on normative halachic rules, we would paskin like Beis Hillel, ein binyan VeStira BeKelim. So this is the parent sugya. This is the home sugya around which everything revolves. Rashi, menorah shel chulias, ukishnafla nifrudu chuliasah. Why are we talking about not setting up menorah? Because the menorah fell down and the pieces broke, and therefore they have to rebuild it. Now, Rashi, again and again in his commentary, adds in a word. The Gemara says, Yesh binyan BeKelim, or Ve'ein binyan BeKelim. Rashi says, Yesh Torahs binyan BeKelim, or Ein Torahs binyan BeKelim. There is the Torah of binyan and Kelim or not. And as we're not talking about whether there is building or isn't building with Kelim, we're talking about whether there's the halachic concept of Torahs binyan, should be translated as something like the halachic concept of binyan in Kelim. Have a look at Rashi. Ein Torahs binyan BeKelim, Ve'ein chayev, and you're not chayev, elim kein also b'melacha. Unless you did with it a melacha. כגון ממחי, כמחתי, כעורק, כתופה, שהן obvious melachos לעצמם. אבל chazoros chulios, שאין ba'elim mishum binyan, but if you're just putting the pieces together, which is binyan, ein boneh ela b'batim v'oyalim. There's only the melacha of boneh with houses and oyalim, but not with kelim. Now, I want to point out at this point that Rashi takes out of the Gemara a rule, which is there's no binyan with kelim, only with batim and oyalim. The Gemara says this rule, in that sense, the Gemara does say this rule. The Gemara says this rule about a particular type of boneh, which is a menorah which fell down and the piece is broken, now you're re-putting it back up. Would that therefore also include a case where you're completely building a keli in another way? Rashi thinks yes. It's just, this is the example of ein zoik v'menorah. What is the case of ein zoik v'menorah? A case where you have a menorah made to pieces and the pieces fell apart and you've put them back up. But out of that emerges, I'll come to in a moment, out of that emerges a principle, which is an ironclad principle, which is ein binyan v'sira BeKelim, period, nothing else to talk about. This is the rule. And it sounds like that because the Gemara does say ein binyan v'sira BeKelim. On the other hand, it only says it in the context of a menorah shel chulios, and maybe not in the context of other sorts of building and destroying kelim. So this is where things start. Rashi, translating the Gemara, seems to say the Gemara is saying a legal principle, a halachic principle, which applies across the board, that even though the example is menorah shel chulios, but the rule is ein binyan v'sira BeKelim. Says Rashi, he couldn't say it clearly, only with batim v'oyalim. That's where you have boneh. Boneh is not a malacha that applies to assembling kelim. In the Gemara itself, you could have wavered a bit on the general rule and just said it's talking about menorah shel chulios, but it doesn't sound like the Gemara. The Gemara does seem to draw a general rule out of it, and that's how Rashi takes it. So you want to ask him, you want to ask you?
I think you
Answered. Yeah.
And so Rashi does not minimize it.
No.
Into a case that
Exactly right. Rashi doesn't minimize it. Rashi takes this as a rule, which is what the Gemara sounds like. Yeah.
You say that it's fallen over and being put back together.
No.
It's put together. It's Rashi who
Yes.
further defines it. It says it's
Yes.
fallen over.
Yes. Okay, so in the Gemara it's chulios. That's a fair point. Rashi seems to understand the word zoikvin means you sort of reset up. And in other words, who's building a new menorah on Yom Tov? It's a case where you had a menorah and it somehow got bashed or fell over and broke. And maybe Rashi's translating that to the word zoikvin. It's a fair point. I don't know. But Rashi still nonetheless draws a general rule out of this. Yeah.
Because if you're building a menorah from scratch, what I'd like from somewhere, that seems to be a different situation. I mean, you're building something that.
Yeah, all these are good distinctions. Rashi doesn't make them. That's all I'm saying. We'll see the Rishonim make indeed all these sorts of distinctions. It will come closer shortly on other Rishonim. Rashi doesn't say that. Rashi says this is the case that the Gemara happens to be talking about, but the rule that emerges is ein binyan v'sira BeKelim only with batim and oyalim. That's it. Okay, now we have a problem. And here we'll come to our Gemara. Our Gemara is one of the very good references where this rule begins breaking down. I'll only quote the ends of the Gemara again. If you are ayil shufta b'kafina demora, so I mentioned this briefly last time. Basically, you have an axe head. Into the axe head goes a wooden handle, but the wooden handle has to be fixed there, and you put a pin to hold the wooden handle in place. If you do that, says the Gemara, Rav Amar Mishum Boneh, Shmuel Amar Mishum Makeh Patish, which seems to indicate that there is Boneh BeKelim, because Rav says the melacha is Boneh, Shmuel says the melacha is Makeh Patish, fine, but Rav says the melacha is Boneh, seeming to indicate that Yesh Binyan BeKelim. So that's one example, the first example that we're going to look at, where this principle seems to break down. Let's have a look at the Gemara. I should have put my Gemara along better. So Rashi says, does Rashi, Al Shufta b'Kvinuna, Shufta Yasid, etc. And he just leaves that. He doesn't comment on how this fits his halachic principle. Let's have a look at one more Maramakim before we look at Tosfos, which is the Gemara in Ayin Daled, which we've Ayin Daled on base, which we've learned previously. The Gemara, this is at the top of page 2 in the source sheet. The Gemara says, Amar Rava, Haiman da'ovid chavisa. A type of chovis, a barrel or a pitcher of, Rashi says helpfully, of clay. Chayv mishum sheva chatois is transgresses sheva chatois, and Rashi lists the melachos. You grind the clay into dust, and then clay was made from mud, right? They'd mine sort of clay from the ground, and then you had to do, which is the melachah of tochen, and then you had to do the melachah of Boneh to get out any stones that were mixed into it. And then you would sieve it, and then you would make it into a dough of sorts by mixing it with water, and then you would have to smooth a pitcher thing, and then you'd have to burn it in the kiln. And these are a whole array of melachos. So in the clay maker, the pitcher maker, should know that he is transgressing 7 melachos on Shabbos. Then the Gemara carries on. Tanura, if you make a oven on if you build a Shabbos on an oven on Shabbos, which is really what is an oven back in the day. It's a clay container, but it has an additional melacha. After you burn it in the kiln, they would smooth the sides and so on. That's an additional melacha of makeh b'patish. So an oven has an 8th melacha. Then chilsa, which is weaving a wickerwork basket. You transgress 11 melachas. You have to harvest the canes that are growing. That's kotza. And then you would gather them in, which is ma'ameh, and then you would sort them out and borah, and then you would finally you would weave them together, and then you would smooth them off. That's the malach of weaving, the malach of makeh b'patish, 11 malachas in the list. So that's the Gemara that we saw in Daf Ayin Daled, very interesting Gemara. Now at the end of the Gemara, asks Rashi, and I put this in bold. This is the very last comments of Rashi on source 3. Umishum Boneh lekna chiyuva. Why isn't Boneh listed in these malachas? Surely you are. So this is page 2, source 3. The Rashi in bold at the end of the sugya. Surely, when you're doing the malacha of Boneh, when you're building these kelim, you're also transgressing Boneh. Surely that should be an additional malacha. Why does that not feature on my list? Now it's Rashi's choice not to feature on the list because the Gemara doesn't say what the 7, 11, or how many, or 8 malachas, 7, 8, or 11 malachas are. And you could have put others on the list. You could have put Boneh on, and I don't know, maybe another one wouldn't be a malacha for some reason or other. You could work it out how to list the malachas. But Rashi says that Boneh is not on the list. Why? To aim Binyan BeKelim. And because there's no Binyan in Kelim. So again, Rashi goes, L'shitoso, ain Binyan BeKelim. Asks Tosfos, both in the Gemara there in Ayin Daled and in our sugya, what do you mean, ain Binyan BeKelim? This isn't a general rule. It's a particular rule in a certain scenario of a menorah shel chulias. You can't extrapolate from that to a sort of new shas rule that there's no Binyan BeKelim. Let's have a look at Tosfos there in source 3, just before source 4, halfway down page 2. Chavisa, and I'm just saying this because it's a relatively short Tosfos and therefore it's not overwhelming. And he references our Gemara as a proof that Rashi has made a mistake when he says there's a general rule ain Binyan BeKelim. So Rashi brings from the Gemara in Beitzah that ain Binyan BeKelim. Says Tosfos, I have evidence that's not correct. There is examples of Binyan BeKelim, and therefore Rashi could have tweaked his list to include Boneh. It's not true that there's ain Binyan BeKelim as a general rule. What's his proof? Our Gemara in Daf Kuf Beis of Ayil Shufta b'kafina tomorrow. Thank you, of putting the peg into the axe head. Let's look at Tosfos. Chavisa v'tanur v'chalsa. Pirish Rashi to mishum Boneh lo mechayev. The ain Binyan BeKelim because there's no Binyan BeKelim. The ain nira. This is not correct. The dafka b'machzeh mitah u'menorah shel chulias, where you compile an IKEA bed or menorah made of pieces. There we say the ain Binyan BeKelim. There's no Binyan BeKelim. If you make completely the whole keli, of course there you are chayiv mishum Boneh. Well, what's my proof? Because we say in Daf Kuf Beis on Beis our sugya, Haimanda al Shufta b'kafina tomorrow chayiv mishum Boneh, etc. One second. Let me just finish reading Tosfos and then I'll take comments. So he says from our Gemara in Daf Kuf Beis, you see that yesh Binyan BeKelim from Ayil Kafina. And then he adds another Gemara, which we also looked at the time, which is also going to be an important reference. Perhaps I should have printed it, which is Menafeach B'Kli Zechuchis. Glass blowing, I think we looked at the last time also, where again glass blowing is deemed Boneh because you're creating a vase or whatever it is. Why is that not Boneh? So here Tosfos says the first of his principles, which is Yesh and ain Binyan BeKelim, means when you are either machzeh or putting parts together. But if you are making a keli from a new, that Yesh Binyan BeKelim, ain Binyan BeKelim. For now, I'm leaving Tosfos' diuk his distinction a little vague because we need to see for other sources. In fact, we need to see Tosfos on the source. Okay, there's a range of hands going up. I'll just go in the order that I saw the hands going up. Yes, sorry, Adam.
He specifically says Tos Machzeh, so I would understand that not use the word compile.
Yeah.
I'm thinking compile, you would be chayiv. It's only when you've done it the first time, it falls apart, and then you do it again.
Yes, I'm leaving it vague.
So,
yes, yes.
So the word machzeh,
yes.
as opposed to I think I see.
Yeah. I'm leaving it vague now. Tosfos' distinction isn't clear. It's stress and chulias or stress and machzeh, and we'll have to work through that. Yes, same thing. Yes.
question. That also brings the case of the filter, the kufna, the kufina, to show colloquially. That's one thing. Which is not a colloquially. It's connecting two components together, which were already made. I don't really understand it. And the second thing is that it's only the opinion of Rav that holds the component. There's also the opinion that says component.
Yes, we don't know why Shmuel says it's not Boneh. It could be because they're good for arguing over Yesh Binyan or Ein Binyan. Or it could be that Shmuel holds this isn't a significant enough thing. It's just a tweak at the edge. You've already got the axe head. You've already got the axe. It is usable. It's just not attached firmly, and therefore this should be deemed makabapatish rather than Boneh. In other words, it's not that everyone agrees that in principle Yesh Binyan BeKelim. It's just Shmuel holds this act of Binyan as a finishing off act rather than a compilation act. In terms of your first, so that's point number one. Again, just for those listening to recording online, the question was that 1 minute Rav and Shmuel argue by Kufina. The answer is we don't see evidence that they're arguing over the principle of Yesh or Ein Binyan BeKelim, just where they're arguing over its makabatish. The second point is there's a rule in Halacha in these sorts in machlokas and around Hilchos Shabbos and other non-mandatory matters that the halacha is like Rav against Shmuel. It's a very well-established halachic principle, and therefore, even if it is an argument Rav and Shmuel, the dominant halachic opinion, the halachic conclusion is would be like Rav that Yesh Binyan BeKelim, ostensibly based on this Gemara. In terms of your first point, yes, I agree with you, and you're highlighting, in a sense, as continuation of Adam and Gary's question, Tosafos' distinction is not entirely clear. What's the Nakuda? Is it because it was already made, or because you've already got the pieces and you're just putting them together? Either way, it's not called making a keli from nothing, either because you're just assembling is a better word than combining, either because you're assembling pieces or because it was already keli. Tosafos' distinction is not entirely clear. Paul, sorry.
No, just building out. Isn't the VeStira in Rashi, because Rashi is in VeStira is saying Masechet, and here is just saying outright Ein Binyan BeKelim. Shouldn't it be distinguishing given that he's in VeStira? He said
in Rashi?
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't call it Shiur in Rashi. I would simply say that Rashi doesn't tell us how he would explain our Gemara. Rashi says, so far we've seen 2 places in Shas, and we'll see there's many more places in Rashi, as a rule, Ein Binyan BeKelim, and he doesn't explain our Gemara of Kufina. That's a of Shufsa BeKefina tomorrow. That's a problem. I don't know if it's a contradiction, Rashi. It's just a Rashi that leaves the problem unresolved. It doesn't tell us what he would do with that Gemara.
What originally you were saying, Ein Binyan, you will learn from VeStira, Ein Binyan.
Yes, and Rashi.
But we don't only learn that in Rashi. We only learn when Rashi says Master in VeStira.
No, not correct. Rashi in BeKelim extrapolates a principle from it. Look how Rashi, again, go back to source 1, the line, the penultimate and final line of Rashi at the top of the page in source 1. Ein Torah Binyan BeKelim, the Ein Achayv, Enim Kein Osa B'Melacha, etc. Aval Chazaras Chilya Shein Ba Elam Mishum Binyan, Ein Boneh Elo B'Batim V'Olim. So Rashi has learned a general rule that Ein Boneh Elo B'Batim V'Olim. So Rashi sees that Gemara as being generic. So a new halachic principle. And we see that we're correct because in Daf Ayin Daled Amud Beis, Rashi repeats the same thing. And he says, why did I not list Boneh amongst melachos? Because Ein Binyan VeStira BeKelim. So Rashi learns that the general rule. What does Rashi do with Shufsa BeKefina, I'll Shufsa BeKefina the Gemara? I don't know. Either he thinks it's machlokas Rav and Shmuel for some reason, Shmuel here is the halacha, or he thinks this is not the definitive sugya. There is a conceptual argument, actually. Let me just step back for one moment and talk about contradictions between sugyas. To what degree is the whole of Shas meant to be read as one unanimous topic? In other words, and to what degree are there steers between sugyas? Or to put it differently, when the Talmud was edited, did the editors think that consistency was important, or did they see their job as merely presenting the discussions in the Beis HaMedrash, and each Gemara summarizes a discussion in the Beis HaMedrash, and sometimes these discussions would come indeed to different halachic conclusions, and therefore you can't expect Shas to be consistent. We know that Shas isn't a halachic work like Shulchan Aruch, or Rambam, where he's trying to lay out rules. It's an organic quote of the free flow conversation in the Beis HaMedrash. Did the editors of Shas see as part of their role in ensuring that all sugyas correlate or not? Now, if you think all sugyas correlate, then you will have to explain distinctions between sugyas. If you think each sugya should be learnt as in a sense an independent recording of what's going on in the Beis Medrash, then you won't bother about consistency in Shas. However, when it comes to practical halacha, you'll have to work out then what to do, because if you have a contradiction between sugyas, how do you handle it? And then you'll use halachic principles, maybe in chumrah if it's a machlokas, or maybe you'll draw your own distinctions and make peshoras, or maybe you will say there's a controlling sugya, a sugya which is the dominant sugya, and anywhere else where it comes up incidentally, that's the less significant sugya. So there's a number of approaches to how to deal with contradictions. The truth is, I don't want to go too far into this because it's way beyond the scope of the Shiur. If you analyze the Rishonim, there's a range of perspectives on the matter, and on we should think of this not as a digital question, but as an analog question. It's not that there are two stances. Is Shas consistent or is Shas not consistent? It should be seen as a spectrum. To what degree is Shas consistent? And I'd say on one end of the spectrum, you have Tosfos, who seek consistency where possible. Even they acknowledge that sometimes there's a sugya which is shalok halacha. On maybe the opposite end of the spectrum, you have maybe perhaps the Rif and that Beis Medrash, maybe even the Rambam to a degree. And Rashi either didn't see it as his role or wasn't seeking consistency. It could well be Rashi saw his role as explaining the Gemara and saying what the Gemara means and reading the Gemara well. And he didn't see it as his job to tidy up the contradictions. Either it wasn't his project because he's a commentator, or because he believed that the decisions didn't need to be tidied up. Either way, Rashi doesn't tell us, at least here, what his answer to the contradiction is. All Rashi does is he translates the Gemara well for us, and he says, don't think that this is a Gemara telling me a specific rule about Zakifas menorah shel chulias, about assembling parts of a menorah. No, the Gemara draws out of this a general rule, ein binyan v'stira. And if you know anything about how to read Gemara, that's what it says. It says a rule, period. It says a rule, ein binyan v'stira. Don't start trying to fudge the issue and sort of say it's just talking about a minority of cases. What would Rashi do about sugya? He'd say it's a shalolach halacha sugya. It's recording a particular conversation in the Beis Medrash, but halacha it's not correct because we have the definitive sugya where it actually discusses the concept. It tells us a rule, and therefore this is what I'm going to go with. I'll mention as an aside, since we're talking about styles of learning and consistency in Shas, Tosfos had a stance in which he even wanted Talmud Yerushalmi to be consistent. And we again and again in Tosfos, you see he'll even with the Bavli, he even wanted Talmud Yerushalmi to, where possible, fit with the Bavli, and was happy to draw distinctions. If you have a Talmud Yerushalmi that seems to come to different halachic conclusions to the Bavli, he would want to try and make them consistent. Again, I don't want to make it over extreme. It's not that the Rif, let's say on one end, didn't seek consistency. Of course he sought consistency, and it's not as if Tosfos always sought consistency. Tosfos also recognizes there were cases where something comes up very incidentally, and these are parallel sugyas, and the Gemara doesn't bother tying up the loose ends or make them consistent. But in general, if we want to say a trend, the Beis Medrash of Tosfos more sought consistency. The Beis Medrash of the Rif and the Migash and various other Rambam perhaps sought less consistency in Shas. But either way, we don't really have an answer as to how Rashi would work out the sugya. We've run out of time for today, so I just really want to draw out the pertinent lines in our Tosfos on Daf Kuf Beis, and I just want to quote them, and then we'll stop for today, just so people aren't left lost. So you'll know what I want to bring out from Tosfos. Tosfos by us in our sugya Kuf Beis asks the same contradiction. What do you mean Ayol Shufta B'Kafina Damar? I thought Ein Binyan VeStira BeKelim. And he answers Omeri. That's only with, again, he uses the word chazara and chulias. Avol binyan gomel mechayiv BeKelim. If it's a binyan gomel, you are chayiv in kelim. And later on, he maybe clarifies this or adds to this and so on. He says it's either a binyan gomel, those are the words he uses, or a binyan sheyesh bo chizuk ve'umnus, a building that demands strength and professionalism. And also, it's not easy to assemble. It's not. The truth is, when I buy an IKEA piece of furniture, I hire a handyman to put it up. So I'm not the person to talk. But so I don't know whether IKEA would be deemed umnus or not. Very interesting halacha l'maisa in Hilchos Chalamoyed. Are you allowed to compile an IKEA piece of furniture or not? Is it deemed melachot or umnus? Even a melachot is not of umnus, you can't stand on Chalamoyed, but there are cases where you can do melachot on Chalamoyed, such melacha, but not if it's a professional job. Either way, Tosfos says if it's professional or particularly firm-fitting, strongly fitting, that would be called binyan. Otherwise, it wouldn't be called binyan. Okay, so we've run out of time for today, but basically, I hope that at least gives an idea of the agenda of what we're going to be covering. In Mitzvah Hashem Tuesday, I've given on the WhatsApp group order priorities, given that there's no way anyone can get through all these sources. But on Tuesday, I'll carry on trying to bring out the pertinent features. Basically, all I'm going to try and establish is 3 or 4 views on the Rishonim of what the distinctions are, and then try and learn the Shulchan Aruch and Ramah and Mishnah Berurah to see how this translates Halacha and Maaseh. That's all we're doing out of this great mass of information which I've dumped on you. I wish everyone a good morning. Thank you so much, as always. Yeah, so you can just give me 1 minute. We'll stop recordings.